Hello students, thank you for being here. We are now entering into Unit 2, all about congruence. This first lesson is about congruent parts, Part 1, so we'll split this information into two different lessons. Remember that this video is just the highlights of the lesson. You will get more in-depth information if you are attending our live classes on a regular basis. So now that we're a full unit into geometry, we're really starting to build our vocabulary. We're starting to build rules or theorems in geometry. And we can start to say, if we know this to be true, based on a theorem, a rule, a postulate, or a proof that we've done, then we know that that is true. And we can use that all throughout geometry to prove different items, to define things, and to build figures. What we're looking at here is the idea of congruent triangles and then writing congruency statements properly. So we're saying here that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. What does that even mean? So we know that congruent segments have exactly the same measurement. We know that segments are the sides of figures. We know that congruent angles are angles that have the same measurement. And we know that angles are formed by two rays, or when we put them inside shapes, they're formed by two segments, which are the sides. So we can use our knowledge of basic congruency to determine whether or not we have figures that are congruent. Specifically, in this case, we're going to talk about triangles being congruent. So first and foremost, they both need to be triangles. Then we need to look at all of the sides and prove that all of the sides are the same measurement. So from B to C and C to A and A to B should be congruent to E to F, F to D, and D to E. And then we need to look at the angles and be sure that the angles are congruent. If all three sides and all three angles are congruent to each other, then we can say that yes, these two triangles are congruent. And then we can write a congruency statement telling anyone and everyone who wants to look at it that these two triangles are congruent. Now, when we do this in a specific way. We write the angles that are congruent to each other in exactly the same position. And in doing that, that shows us the sides that are congruent to each other. So angle A matches up with angle D. They're congruent. They're both first in the names. Angle B matches up with angle E. They're both second in the names. And angle C matches up with angle F. They're both third in the names of your triangles. Using the same idea, we can look at the distance between A and B and notice that's the same as the distance between D and E. So the letters next to each other represent segments or sides that are congruent to each other. Keeping in mind that when we name segments or sides, we only use two letters. So that means that segment BC or side BC is congruent to side EF. And then we can say that from F to D, even though they're not next to each other in the name, they are segments on your triangle, is congruent to C to A. We can show that in the figure with our hashes to show congruency, or we can just simply look at our congruent statement to see which parts are congruent to each other. More specifically, we can talk about the parts that correspond to each other or match up with each other in the figures. So hitting on what I just mentioned with the parts that correspond with each other, that is important vocabulary to know. So our corresponding parts, again, are going to be the parts of your figure, the sides and the angles that match with the other congruent figure. Again, the sides and the angles that have the same measurement. All right, please take the information in this video and apply it in your iExcel assignment. Good luck.